United Thoughts Podcast. Hi, this is Vander Hart. Welcome back to another episode and happy Friday. To kick off the weekend, I want to talk about a few items in the news. An older poll, it was actually conducted last month. I know that's like ancient history now in the world of social media and breaking news. But I think it's very important when we look at the landscape of abortion policy and the direction of our country, as well as where Democratic lawmakers are headed. Also want to talk about a craptastic bill that was just passed in the U.S. House today, H.R. 1, the For the People Act of 2019. All three of our Democratic Congress members of Congress in the state of Iowa voted for that. They even co-sponsored it. I want to briefly touch upon that. Also encourage you to read an article I wrote about that. And then I also want to look at a couple think pieces I read this week. And then I had a conversation with State Senator Jason Schultz, who talked about Funnel Week and how his priorities and what passed, what survived this week, what didn't. Before we get to any of that, first a word from our sponsor, American Principles Project.
At American Principles Project, we believe that human dignity should be at the heart of public policy. We work in all 50 states and in Washington, D.C. to promote life, religious freedom, local control over education, authentic economic progress for working Americans, and a return to constitutional principles such as federalism. Want to help American Principles Project? Visit our website today, AmericanPrinciplesProject.org. That's American Principles, PLES, Project.org. Sign up for email updates. Help us out. We want to work with you. That's AmericanPrinciplesProject.org.
Welcome back. I first want to talk about a poll that Axios reported on. It's a poll done by Marist, commissioned by the Knights of Columbus, which is a Catholic organization, an evil organization if you talk to some members of Congress. Basically, they write by the numbers. The poll found that Americans are now as likely to identify as pro-life, 47%, as they are pro-choice, 47%. Last month, a similar Marist survey found that Americans were more likely to identify as pro-choice than pro-life, 55 to 38%, a 17-point gap. So basically, they closed the 17-point gap in a month. The survey also found that 80% of Americans support abortion being limited to the first 3 months of pregnancy, an increase of 5 percentage points since last month's Marist poll. So they've been polling Americans' attitudes on abortion for over a decade. And Axios was told this is the first time since 2009 that as many or more Americans have identified as pro-life as have identified as pro-choice. But what was found most significant was that Democrats, specifically those under the age of 45, seem to be leading the shift. This month's poll, they write, found 34% of Democrats identify as pro-life versus 61% pro-choice. Last month, those numbers were 20% and 75% respectively. And among Americans under 45, 47% identify as pro-life versus 48% pro-choice. In January, those numbers were 28% and 65% respectively. So what in the world has changed? Well, Democrats have gone absolutely crazy over abortion. They, Carvalho, let's see, what's her name? Barbara Carvalho, who directed the new Marist poll, said an increased discussion of late-term abortion in the public forum in the past month appears to have made the biggest difference in how people identify on the issue. So, Republicans if they don't take advantage of this shift, they're just dumb. They're dumb. It's a lot of things have happened that is causing the shift. For instance, Trump seized on the outrage during his State of the Union address, calling out Virginia Governor Ralph Northam's abortion comments and the passage of New York's law promoting to promote a congressional ban on late-term abortions. We don't yet have a federal ban on late-term abortions. the time is ripe for this. And the comments too that Democrats could not even back a bill protecting survivors of abortion, babies that have been born. This bill, as U.S. Senator Ben Sasse put it, as he's the sponsor of the bill, basically they're in support of a fourth trimester abortions, killing babies or allowing babies who've been born to die. Kermit Gosnell would be pleased, certainly, because basically they're in Camp Gosnell on that one. And that is just completely radical, as this poll is showing. And this poll also shows, now, obviously it's just one poll, and unfortunately the collective memory, of these things tends to decline after time. But Republicans, if they were smart, they would keep pushing on this. I've said time and time again that this abortion is an issue that conservatives can win on if they can frame it in a way that's winsome, and pointing out how extreme Democrats are on this issue. Democrats largely have succeeded in painting Republicans as extreme, but now I think we're seeing that flip-flop. And that's a good thing for the life movement, and I'm encouraged by this poll. Hopefully we'll see that continue. Also, good news, I didn't talk about this with State Senator Schultz today, but we saw one bill that survived the funnel. This also survived the funnel last year but didn't pass, and that's the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Basically, I wrote a piece about this earlier this week called Will the Iowa Legislature Pass the Religious Freedom Restoration Act? The Senate version, Senate File 508, passed out of subcommittee, and then the Senate Local Government Committee passed it by a 7-4 party line vote on Monday. And to me, it's unbelievable this is party line. There used to be bipartisan consensus on these things. There was overwhelming bipartisan consensus on the federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act that was signed by President Bill Clinton back in 1993. And this bill just it echoes the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This bill doesn't allow discrimination. So people who try to state that bills like this allow discrimination, that's just plainly wrong. This bill does is it provides an avenue for judicial review if a person claims their free exercise of religion had been substantially burdened by the state or municipal government in Iowa. The bill reads this way: government shall not substantially burden a person's exercise of religion, even if the burden results from a rule of general applicability, unless it is demonstrated that applying the burden to that person's exercise of religion is in furtherance of a compelling governmental interest and is the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling government interest. So basically, if a state rules against a person, say the state of Iowa, the Civil Rights Commission rules against a Christian florist who does not want to provide flowers for a same-sex wedding ceremony. This is going to ask them 3 questions. The court will consider 3 questions, as well as the Civil Rights Commission would be forced to do this as well. Is the government substantially burdening a person's sincere belief through its action? If the answer is yes, then the case moves forward. If the answer is no, then the case will be dismissed. Now, I would argue that requiring a Christian florist to provide services for a same-sex wedding ceremony does significantly burden their free exercise of religion. Second question is, does the government have a compelling reason like health or safety to interfere? In this particular case, the answer would be no. The case would be closed and the individual wins, because there are tons of florists that will provide flowers for these ceremonies that won't bat an eye at that. But these particular florists are being targeted by LGBTQ activists, trying to force them to embrace their sexual ethics, and that's wrong. Now, is there a reasonable alternative to serve the public interest? That's the third question. If the answer is yes, the individual win. Obviously, yes. It's not like there's one florist in town. I mean, there's all sorts of ways they can get flowers or cakes or you name it. Now, what this bill doesn't do is it doesn't allow somebody to discriminate based on a person's identity. So if I were a restaurant owner, or let's go back to the Christian florist for a second. The Christian florist can't say to a person coming in and buying a bouquet of flowers, "Hey, are you homosexual? Oh, if you're homosexual, I'm not gonna sell to you." Now that would violate Iowa Civil Rights Act. And the Religious Freedom Restoration Act does not protect that, because that is discrimination based on the identity of the person involved. Now, I think people should be allowed to freely associate. I think people should be allowed to deny services for whatever reason because it's a private business. I don't think, we're not seeing what we saw during the 60s where, blacks were pushed out of, pretty much everywhere with Jim Crow laws. This is not the same we're not under the same circumstances here. That said, as a Christian, I wouldn't not serve these people coming into a restaurant or my place of business. For one thing, I'm not asking their sexual orientation. I'm not asking their gender identity. I'm not asking a whole host of things because I'm just going to sell them flowers. But when they ask me to participate in an event that I think violates my religious conscience, which same-sex marriage or wedding does, then I'd have to say no. So, and that's something people need to understand when it comes to cases like this. It's not about the identity, it's about the activity. I'm thinking about a lot of the cases that have been in the news related to Christian florists and bakers being, at odds, their religious liberty being at odds with the civil rights codes or sexual orientation, gender identity laws. Almost, at least every person I'm thinking of anyway, I'm sure there's probably some examples elsewhere that isn't the case, but all the people that had complaints filed against them had homosexual customers. Again, it's the activity, it's not the identity. And that's something we have to keep in mind. So, but it amazes me how big business is lined up against this bill. Registered against this bill here in Iowa are groups like Meredith Corporation, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Apple, all the Chamber of Commerces that have lobbyists at the state capitol, the Iowa Business Council, Ames Chamber of Commerce, Federation of Iowa Insurers, Wellmark, Iowa Association of Business and Industry, which I find very disappointing. I can no longer support that organization because they don't care about my religious liberty. The Greater Des Moines Partnership, Travel Federation of Iowa, Principal Financial Group. Now, Principal is obviously a huge employer in Iowa, as is Wellmark. Microsoft has built facilities here in Iowa. Facebook has new data centers in Altoona. Google is here. Apple is going to expand to Waukee. All this big business is putting pressure on Republicans because Republicans are typically business friendly. So here we have big business versus religious liberty. And what I want to see is Iowa lawmakers vote on the side of Iowans' religious freedom and not the almighty dollar. But they're under a lot of pressure. Pray for our lawmakers that they make the right decision, as well as Governor Reynolds, if this becomes law, or if this bill is passed and comes to her desk. There's a lot of hurdles. It didn't make it out of the Iowa Senate last year. The Iowa House hasn't even taken up their version of it. It basically wasn't even assigned a subcommittee. I think part of that strategy just to deal with the Senate bill should it pass, because it's going to have it would have an easier time to passing in the Senate. But we just need to pray that this happens. Again, it's not a discrimination bill. It's not a discrimination bill. People who label this a discrimination bill are being deceitful. So, moving on, David French wrote an excellent think piece in National Review discussing Ilhan Omar. Basically, the title is Ilhan Omar shows how intersectionality can elevate bigotry. If you may be aware that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has made some anti-Semitic tweets and comments that has come under fire, mostly by Republicans. The media is picking, to their credits, picking some of it up. Democrats just for some reason can't. They'll criticize it, but they don't treat this like they've treated Congressman Steve King when he, based on some of the tweets he's made and some of the comments he's made regarding race, and it's incredible to watch. But this kind of explains why. French writes, quote, "Something remarkable is happening on the Democratic side of the aisle. Faced with multiple anti-Semitic statements from freshman member of Congress Ilhan Omar, the Democrats are actually struggling to unite to condemn her remarks. This disunity is made all the more remarkable by the fact there's nothing at all subtle about what Omar has said. In the past, she's tweeted that Israel has hypnotized the world. Recently, she's claimed that American support for Israel was all about the Benjamins, and has now twice raised the argument that support for Israel involved allegiance to a foreign country. Each of these statements represents a classic anti-Semitic trope, and the later statements were made after she came under fire for her previous comments. She knew she was under scrutiny, and yet she doubled down. So, while multiple Democrats have condemned her comments forcefully and unequivocally, she's also enjoying a curious wave of support, like Rashida Tlaib, another member of Congress. She said basically, "I am so honored to serve with Ilhan Omar, an incredible, courageous woman. Every time I worry about her and the ugly attacks, I remember what she said to me 2 months ago. I survived war. I can survive this." Basically there's been op-eds in the Washington Post, three op-eds. One is called "The Dishonest Smear of Ilhan Omar," and then another one, "The Democrats' Criticism of Ilhan Omar Suggests Little Room for Diversity on Israel." And the interactability of Ilhan Omar's identity in Trump's, got to open up the picture here because I can't see it. Sorry. In Trump's condemnation of her comments. So, it's just, it's remarkable. Then James Clyburn also came to her defense as well. French asks, quote, "What is going on? Why are we seeing so many prominent voices rally to Omar's side? This is how intersectionality works. Essentially, the pattern goes like this. Under intersectionality theories, your identity grants you credibility, your experience grants you authority, and the responsibility then of your progressive friends is to act as your allies. Omar's identity as a woman of color, as a Muslim, as a refugee, means that she speaks with great experiential authority. She comes to the public square, as Tlaib and Clyburn indicate, from a position of personal pain and direct experience with marginalization and oppression. Allyship then means that it's important to elevate her voice and to protect her credibility, to treat her as the GOP finally in parentheses, treated Steve King is unthinkable. Direct rebuke, much less direct action such as stripping her of committee assignments, is interpreted as an attack not on her ideas, but on her very identity, which is a bunch of bunk." So, they had a wishy-washy resolution that passed yesterday that had Republicans put that forward in light of Steve King, they would have been roundly criticized. So, but that intersectionality explains a lot of this, and we're going to see more of this garbage, more of this double standard probably down the road. Um, then I want to highlight an opinion piece by Ross Douthat. He points out basically the piece is called "The Democrats Have a Culture Problem." The Democrats have a culture problem. Does the Democratic Party still have centrists? Does it need them? And I want to trying to find the money quote here. Here's the money quote. In the sense of the story of the Democrats' struggles over the last 15 years is a story of a party that has consistently moved leftward faster than the also changing country and consistently overrode victories on same-sex marriage above all as a template for how every cultural battle should play out. It's a story of a new feminism that's pushing the party ever further from the center on abortion, of a new cohort of white liberals who are actually to the left of many African Americans on racial issues, of an activist base that brands positions that many liberals held only yesterday as not only mistaken, but bigoted or racist or beyond the pale. And in this part of the Democratic coalition story, the center-left's role has been extraordinarily passive, essentially following the cultural left a tiny bit more slowly rather than trying to devise a more moderate approach. So it's... then he goes on to say, quote, which means that if the center-left abdicates, the Democratic Party as a whole will have moved to the left on every front, writing off not only the possibility of compromising with Republican politicians, which for now might be understandable, which obviously I disagree with that, but also the possibility of winning over voters who would almost certainly be Democrats if the party still occupied the cultural terrain that it held in 2000 or even as late as 2008. So, I don't quite agree entirely with that, but I think he makes some great points about the electoral possibilities for Democrats, decreasing as they go down this road. And, going back to the Marist poll, I mean, that indicates how badly they're really botching this battle over abortion. They really misread things. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. Again, that was Ross Douthat's piece in the New York Times. The Democrats have a culture problem. So now I want to bring up my conversation with State Senator Jason Schultz. We talked about Funnel Week. We talked about his priorities. We talked about what he was glad to see not survive Funnel Week. So without further ado, here's my conversation with State Senator Jason Schultz from Schleswig. Senator Schultz, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us on the Caffeinate Thoughts podcast. I appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here. Thank you for asking.
So, just in a nutshell, how just gives kind of a broad overview how the legislative session's going for for you personally, as how long you served in office now, I guess.
Well, I'm six years in the House, and this will be my 5th session in the Senate.
Wow. Okay. So how are things going for you this session?
Well, in my mind, I think they're going pretty well. I think we are getting the important pieces of legislation through. We got them through Funnel Week. That was today, March 8th. So everything the Senate wanted, all of our priorities got through our own funnel.
Okay.
So I think policy bills were well managed there. We released our budget proposal last week, right around the first of the month. So all 3 budget proposals are out, and I know appropriations folks are working on those, our appropriations staff and legislators. So I think we're rolling along pretty well. I'm feeling like it's pretty well managed right now.
Okay, so some of those priorities would be, just so for our listeners' sake, I know what some of them are, but they probably don't.
Sure. No. Well, myself personally, I've been trying to spend some time on welfare reform, and it isn't to We're not trying to aim for the recipients who are in need so much as we are the folks who think it's just easier to be there than it is, out in a job, and those who are trying to defraud the system. So we've been working on eligibility and verification efficiencies, and I learned a lot there that there's many states are using private vendors who have legal access to databases that show whether somebody's reporting earnings, where their residence is, all that type. So we can verify people moving in and out of the state, whether they're working or whether they're not.
Okay.
And I think it'd be much more efficient than having our own human services do it. Other states are finding it's quicker, more efficient, and more accurate. I tried. Yeah.
Oh, what's the name of that bill, or the number for that bill?
Oh, I'm no good at numbers. I wish
Okay, no problem.
I'm in my pickup right now. I don't have it with me. I call it the eligibility and verification bill.
Okay.
So, the one, you don't get legislators talking about failure very often, but one of my bills failed, and I put it out there so I could study it and get feedback on it. What I wanted to do was have a photo ID either on the food benefit card, the SNAP card, or require a photo ID when you present it, so that I want the person receiving the benefits to be the one using the card.
Right.
And what I learned from there is a great disappointment. Federal USDA rules are such that it appears to me they don't care who uses the card after they send it out.
Nice.
Yeah, no kidding. Not only are we forbidden, yeah, I kind of figured that. Not only are we allowed to do a lot of things, the rules are even written so, and I can't quote it verbatim, but it's very close to, even if you decide to do this on a voluntary basis, it shall not be used to qualify or disqualify a purchase from the person presenting the card. So retailers are forbidden from using any identification means to match the person with the card. So what we decided to do was flip it around then, and then we got bipartisan support, actually. We flipped it around after talking to officers across the state, deputies and officers. They frequently pick up perpetrators of whatever crime, and when they are emptying their pockets, to put them in a cell overnight, they will find 1, 2, 3, 4 electronic benefit cards in their pocket.
Oh gosh.
And yeah. I mean, and we know that people are selling these cards, for pennies or dimes on the dollar. We know that they're traded for drugs. We know that. So now we created a criminal offense for having an unauthorized SNAP card, and law enforcement to tell Department of Inspections and Appeals, whose job it is to keep track of fraud investigations. So if we can find a pattern of somebody who never seems to be able to hold their card, it'll give us something to go on to make sure that that's not outright fraud.
And there should be bipartisan support for that, I would think. It'd be disappointing if there weren't.
Yes, I agreed. In fact, Senator Bill Dotzler came up, and he's a friend of mine. I hope he considers me a friend. And he said, well, there's where we can find some common ground. So he helped move the bill with me through committee, and he's going to speak for it on the floor. So we got that done. The other one is work requirements for the expansion population of Medicaid. We ran a couple subcommittees on that to get numbers. We think there's 170,000 Iowans in that expansion population. And after you go through all the different categories of exemptions and who's reporting earnings, we've got 60,000 Iowans on there who are not reporting earnings and are not exempt due to physical or mental disability or pregnancy or something like that. I don't think it's asking too much for these folks to do 20 hours of volunteer service or work or job training. They have to contribute back something if they can.
Right.
And
that's reasonable.
I think so.
What kind of pushback are you getting on that bill, though? I imagine you're getting some.
I am getting a lot of partisan pushback on that. In fact, I was frustrated frustrated enough. I didn't raise my voice and I didn't lash out, but I just asked, is it the case that all of you around this table are simply supporting a universal wage? Because that's what they're essentially doing, is saying we want to give these people a set amount of money. We want nothing in return and no standards to meet. Just simple access to money with nothing in return. And I got a whole lot of blank stares. Nobody would say yes or no.
Wow.
But it seems to me there needs to be some accountability, because somebody got up in the morning and went to work and paid taxes so that could happen.
Right.
And that's, I'm not trying to beat up on anyone who's had a tough run, but at the same time I want to represent the guy who's going to work and raising a family and going to church on Sunday and doing it right.
Okay. So what other priorities or what other things have survived Funnel Week?
Well, I've always life and Second Amendment have always been big deals to me. We have a constitutional amendment that is through committee that we're going to move that puts a strict scrutiny language for judicial review of our gun laws in our Iowa Constitution. That would be the highest level of scrutiny, which means it would be as tough as possible to overturn our Second Amendment freedoms.
Yeah, basically,
So
it just adds the language of the Second Amendment in the Iowa Constitution, doesn't it?
Oh, it's a little stronger than that yet.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah, no. Matt Winchell did nice work on this. It lays out all of that we recognize the right to keep, transport, bear, all the different words of that the courts have used to say that you didn't have the right to do this. Well, we include that all in there and say that any infringement on this shall be met with strict scrutiny, which means that the state has the highest level of is compelled to do something because it has the highest level of interest. I forget the exact legal language. What I can tell you is lawyers say, well, this would be tough to meet, and that's the point. It should be tough to meet strict scrutiny of our Second Amendment rights.
Right.
Our founder said shall not be infringed, and I think they meant it.
Right. So is this a little bit different than what originally passed and then kind of fell apart when the Secretary of State didn't actually do what he was supposed to do to?
Supposed to be very, very similar. It might have a word or two difference because we always tweak, but I think it's very similar. And we've got that out of the Senate. Yes.
Yeah. Regarding what happened with the Iowa Secretary of State's office, there's a bill to kind of rectify that, right? Is that in the Senate or is that originating in the House?
I know that may be both, but I know that Senator Robbie Smith has been dealing with this. And essentially what we're going to do is require the Legislative Service Agency to put it on their website. That will count as official publishing. And then also the Secretary of State may publish in 2 newspapers in every congressional district. So we're going to double down. But really, the requirement itself is somewhat archaic due to our electronic media, the internet. Everybody's has access to all this news. It's not 1857 anymore.
Right. Well, it gives the secretary. Now, obviously, I think Secretary Pate, it was just an oversight on his office's part, but
I believe it was an honest mistake.
Yeah, the fact that it does give the Secretary of State kind of a veto if they oops, I forgot to publish that. I'm sorry.
I know. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
It is. And I don't know, maybe they lived in a different world 150 years ago, but partisan politics have gotten to the point where I think we need to move that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So, and of course, the Life Amendment, I know.
The Life Amendment? Isn't that fun? We have an amendment that doesn't change the Constitution.
Right. Well, yeah. It's sad that you have to have language like that. That basically, for our listeners who maybe haven't read that bill, I've written on it a couple times. But basically, it says that there's no right to abortion in the Iowa Constitution or right to taxpayer funding of abortion in the Constitution. That's my paraphrase, but because there isn't. The Iowa Supreme Court they on the 72-hour wait period just magically created a right out of thin air in the Iowa Constitution that's not in there. So,
Agreed. They're not the first not the first Supreme Court to do that on abortion.
no, but I think they actually went even further than Roe in what they
did.
said.
They did. If I kind of think myself, if Roe had gone as far as the Iowa Supreme Court, it would have been overturned already.
Right.
I mean, it is so egregious what we've done. And in the same year, when you had New York move the abortion at birth effort, I mean, my goodness. I mean, look at what they're doing to push back when life starts moving forward.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, have you been involved in any of the reforms to the judicial nomination process?
I am on the judiciary, and I'm visiting with the folks who are doing that. But no, I'm not on the inside of that.
Okay.
I hear some ideas. I'm in some conversations, but I'm not one of the major input providers. But I think
that survived funnel.
Yes.
That survived. Okay, good.
A version did. We're going to have to be working on that all the way through.
Okay. So,
I mean, we'll have amendments even on the floor, and it'll probably bounce back and forth once or twice.
Okay. Do you kind of remember what your version looks like? The version that looks like in a nutshell.
In a nutshell is we don't eliminate lawyers from it, because certainly they do have a lot of inside information. But instead of the attorneys of Iowa selecting the commission, we're going to go to the political leaders, and on a pretty equal basis. Majority leader and minority leader of each chamber get 2, and the governor gets to fill it out. So so we will be accountable to the people when we fill that commission out, as opposed to just, I call them super citizens, just private attorneys across the state selected.
Right. And they actually have a low turnout for those elections within the members of the bar too, don't they?
They do. It's like 18%.
Crazy. So,
yes, and from what I understand, the last time when we started asking questions about it, the Bar Association sent out a notice that, hey, you better participate in this. I think they got over 20 or 22%. I mean, so what we have is the activist lawyers selecting the nomination commission. Right.
Which, I mean, I think when in 1962, when they implemented the Missouri Plan for judicial nominations, it made sense at that point in time. I mean, I don't want to see us go back to having elections, partisan
I don't
elections
either.
for judges. I think that would be a bad move, and that does not do good things for having an impartial judiciary. But
agreed.
But this process that people claim is not political, all it is political. It's just political behind the scenes.
Yes.
Where there's no transparency. I mean, ideally, I would love to see us adopt the federal way of nominating judges, and then still keeping our retention election. I think that's important, but that requires a constitutional amendment. What you guys are doing?
Yes. I would agree. I don't want to go back to elections. I think that'd be a poor idea. And but we have to have public input, or at least people who are accountable to the public.
Right. So, any other highlights for you so far this session?
Well, the budget itself. I know we won't finish here, but I was very proud of our appropriations team in the Senate. We have a budget proposal that spends no more money than we are this year.
Okay.
But the trick, and it's not an accounting trick. We had $250 million in spending last year on a couple items that we don't have this year. $250 million, I should make sure I say. We're going to move that to our priorities. So we got education, we have healthcare, public safety. So we add to our priorities, but we don't spend any more money in our first proposal. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Now, it's considerably lower than the governor's budget and the House budget. I think the House budget is probably, their targets are the high
Yeah.
compared.
Yeah. Yeah, we end up see, and if you add that in, we're still, I mean, so new spending, and that new spending is, remember what was one-time spending last year. We're just going to reappropriate it. It's still like a 2.5% increase. So, my goodness, only in government. I mean, I say this tongue in cheek because I'm supportive of the effort, but only in government can you spend no more money and have a 2.5% increase.
Yeah, crazy. Well, it'd be
I
nice.
mean, it just is.
It'd be nice to see the budget actually, hold at the same level. I'm one, I know it's easy to complain about the budget increasing every year, but a couple things we need to keep in mind is that education funding, because of the number of students are growing, that's always going to grow. We could obviously debate how that money's spent, and
certainly.
But you're gonna invariably have some growth just because the student population is growing. Same too with Medicaid.
And Medicaid, that's the other biggie.
So it's really hard to put a cap. I mean, we can whine and complain about it, but I mean, some of this just is inevitable because of state government and the priorities the government has. But that doesn't mean this legislature needs to go on a spending spree. So I'm happy to see.
And that's it. That's why I was so excited that at least we're going to send the message that there is a way to do this without spending more money.
Right. Well, that's good to know.
I'm excited.
So is there anything that got killed that you're excited about?
Oh, you know what? I have to plead ignorance. Nothing comes to mind right now. I mean, there's a few little things, but I finished my last committee last night at 6 p.m., got in my car, drove home. It was about 10 o'clock when I got home. I went to bed, got up and started doing interviews and constituent issues. I haven't even looked at the list to see what died and what lived.
Okay.
So, I mean, we're that fresh off of it. So right now, well, you know what comes to mind is just that last meeting. You're familiar with Marsy's Law?
Yes.
That is dead.
Okay.
And I'm not going to say I'm happy for it or not. I'm a little uncomfortable with the situation, but I'm uncomfortable with a constitutional amendment driven by a man in California trying to put the same amendment in every state. I mean, let's put it that way.
Okay.
I think Iowa has a pretty good victims' rights statute in code. I get nervous about some of the complications of Marsy's Law. It's kind of a blanket policy that doesn't fit into all the niches and corners of each state law that it falls on. Mm-hmm. But I think that's very notable that it died this year. I guess I should mention all of the Article 5 convention resolutions, and they really kind of came out of the woodwork this year. All of those died at Funnel.
Okay.
Our Republican, just in I guess a partisan comment or a party comment, we're having a Republican family discussion or argument over that.
Yep. I'm kind of a part of that a little bit. I'm actually pro Article 5. I don't know where you are on that.
Well, I'm generally a yes, but I tell you, my constituents back here have activated and really don't want me to support it.
Okay. They're afraid of a runaway convention.
They are, and I just don't see that. But I tell you, they're my bosses, and I because underlying it all, I don't think we'll ever get to the threshold anyway, because the federal government will do something to defuse the pressure when we get close. They do not want the states interfering in their power grab, and I don't know. Most of us supporters, we think that the federal government will step in and do something that makes us think that it got addressed and it'll defuse the pressure. And so anyway, I wanted to send a statement, is what I wanted, that they're failing, and we don't have any faith in them anymore. And I guess we won't get to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Oh,
And
I enjoy what you do, so thank you for doing that
right.
and for inviting me.
And that concludes today's episode of the Caffeinated Thoughts podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you happen to be listening to this podcast somewhere other than on our website, please be sure to check out caffeinatedthoughts.com. Again, that's caffeinatedthoughts.com. You can also like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, sign up for our email updates. That way you don't miss a single article. Also, you can listen to this podcast using your favorite podcast app. We are currently on Apple Podcasts, Google Play. We're on Spotify, on Tuned In, on Stitcher. Who am I missing? I'm missing somebody. Oh, SoundCloud, and also Podbean. So, you can sign up, and that way you don't miss a single episode either. So I hope you do that. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great weekend. Until next time, take care.